Hi, folks. Welcome back to Kitchen Table Politics. I'm your host, Jeremy Massengale. This is the podcast where we all sit around the kitchen table and talk about political ideas. I want to take just a second to thank all of the listeners that are coming back each and every week and building this relationship with us so that we can have good dialogues. I appreciate any feedback to the show. Please go to ktpolitics.com and send us an email or find us on Twitter. This show is about dialogue, and I can't have it if you're not contacting me and let me know how you feel. This week, we're going to talk about healthcare. I think it's an extremely important subject that's on everybody's mind, so we're going to jump on top of it and see what our ideas are. My guest is going to be Jennifer Briney. She's the host of Congressional Dish, a podcast that discusses Congress and keeps an eye on what they're doing. Jennifer, thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Tell us a little bit about your show, your podcast.
Well, I started Congressional Dish about 4.5 years ago because I was just having trouble finding any information that wasn't slanted about what was going on in Congress. And so to teach myself how Congress works, I decided to read every bill that passed the House of Representatives for an entire Congress. It was the 113th Congress, and just tell people what I was finding. And so that's how it started. And now it's just kind of morphed into I was shocked to find the amount of corporate influence that was in the bills and how directly it was connected to donors. And yeah, so Congressional Dish is really my window into the world and how the United States fits into it and what our role is. So I watch congressional hearings, I read congressional bills, I use as many primary sources as I possibly can, and I tell people what I'm finding from the perspective of someone who's disgusted by all of the major political parties and just wants to know what's going on.
I think that word disgusted is how most of us feel about our government right now.
I agree.
Reading all of those bills, that's a massive undertaking.
You know, it is, but at the same time, the more I've done it, the easier it gets for me to do. It was really overwhelming in the beginning because I had taken a business law class in college, so I was familiar with the language. But now I understand that so many of the words that are put into these bills are just unnecessary filler. So I've gotten a lot better at getting to the meat of a paragraph much quicker. So it sounds a lot worse than it is, although I don't know, maybe I'm just a crazy person who likes it.
I do enjoy reading them as well. I have to be picky about the ones I do because, as you said on your show recently, a lot of the bills that are introduced don't really go anywhere. So it's just kind of useless to read them.
Yeah, an average of 97% of them never become law.
Right. So let's get into healthcare. That's on everybody's mind right now with the recent events that are happening in Washington, D.C. Let's start out. What is your definition of healthcare?
My definition of healthcare?
Yeah, what does healthcare mean to you?
I mean, healthcare is being able to go to a doctor and getting fixed. And there's an extra element to that, but it's being able to go to the doctor without worrying about going bankrupt. I think that in the United States in particular needs to be included in the definition.
Okay. I'm certainly agreeing with you there. Everybody wants to be able to go to the doctor and not be interfered with, I think, because healthcare is between you and the medical staff at that place, right? So if other people are involved, it's kind of hard sometimes. I've seen that personally in my life. I don't know how other people feel about that, but that's what I've experienced. Healthcare is definitely something that's between you and the medical staff, and being able to afford it is extremely important. I do agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, at least that's the way it should be. But in my experience, the health insurance company has now become such an important part of our health care, because I know that the health insurance company tells me which doctor I can go to. It tells me which services that I can get. I mean, the health insurance company, if there's anything getting between me and my doctor, it's them.
I completely agree with you. I've seen that over and over and over in my personal life. The doctor says, well, I would love to do this, but I have to check with your insurance company. You need to be on this medication, but we have to check with your insurance company first. That's a huge problem.
Yeah. Yes, it is. And that's, I guess, what I get so frustrated about, because I read the Affordable Care Act and now I just read the repeal and replace bill, and it's all based on these insurance companies. And so I just kind of find it fascinating that the debate so often is get government out of my healthcare, where I feel like the government is the only thing guaranteeing that I get any when I go there, because I had insurance before the Affordable Care Act. I went to get a physical. I talk about this stupid physical all the time, but I went to get a physical. I paid my $20 copay, but then when I went behind the doors, I was paid for every little, or they charged me for every little thing. They charged me for getting weighed. They charged me for the blood test. They charged me for everything. It ended up costing me $400 because there was no requirement on these health insurance companies to cover anything. And so they just made up the plans as they went. And yeah, so I mean, out of the concerning middlemans in my world, it's the insurance company I'm concerned about, not so much the government.
I completely agree with you on the insurance part. I think the government personally is just as bad. Anytime that you have a third party involved in the equation, there's going to be problems. So instead of the insurance company deciding what tests you need, eventually the government would decide which tests you need. It's the same thing. There's still a third party involved making those decisions, not your doctor.
I mean, I can kind of see that. I just don't know how else we do it, because before the Affordable Care Act, it was a private insurance system that was making all the rules. And when it comes to a private insurance company, we have no control over who's at the top of it, and we have no control over the rules that they make. At least with the government, we do get to vote, and we have a say in who's at the top. And so if there has to be a middleman, which at this point, I'm struggling to find a way that there isn't one. If there has to be one, I would rather it be the one that's at least accountable to the people in some capacity and doesn't exist just to make money. You know what I mean?
I see where you're coming from. My problem is I just don't see them as accountable at this point. I see a government that's completely corrupt. I see a broken system, and I see a lot of disappointment and frustration in the American people, and I just don't trust them to make that decision. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, it absolutely does make sense. I mean, I document the corruption all the time, and I guess that's what's so frustrating. But I think a lot of that we have to take responsibility for ourselves, because one of the reasons the government is so corrupt is that we keep electing corrupt people to run it. So it's like if we continue to have a Congress that's made up of these people that have been there for 20, 30 years, we know how much money they're taking. We know they're taking it from corporate donors. We're allowing this system of bribery, and we keep encouraging it by voting for these same people over and over again. So a lot of it, I don't think it's the government's fault, because the government is made up of people. The government isn't like a thing that functions on its own. It's functioning based on the people we're hiring, and we're doing a terrible job as voters in picking those people. So I feel like there is a way to fix the government as voters, paying more attention, actually showing up to vote. I mean, there's a lot of, if you look at like this last election, for example, the numbers pretty much indicate that about 25% of us are on Team Republican, 25% of us are on Team Democrat, and about 50% of us are just caught in the middle somewhere and not voting at all. And so what that tells me is there is a giant untapped voting block here of people that just don't buy into this red versus blue dynamic, that if they can have an option on the ballot, I think we could change this country and do it quite quickly. But that's what's going to be necessary to make the government something that actually is functioning for the people. And you're not wrong.
Right.
Government right now isn't functioning for us. And I think this repeal and replace bill is a great example of that. Even the Affordable Care Act. I mean, they kept a system based on private insurance, and they put some rules on it, which is good. Now when I go get a physical, it's just the $20 copay. So it did put some rules on the system, but it created a system based around this for-profit entity, which does fund campaigns of so many people that are in Congress and the executive branch. So we're in a nasty situation.
We definitely need to get rid of the interference from third parties.
But how do we do it?
That is a good question. All right. So there's some examples that we can talk about. First is a concierge medicine or a membership medicine. Some examples of that. There's a doctor in Lincoln, Nebraska, who just opened up a membership-only medical clinic, which means you pay basically a retainer. So it's $50 for young people, $75 a month for middle age, and then $100 a month for seniors. So let's take that model for a second. You can have that doctor 24 hours a day. So we're going back to before we had insurance. The doctor doesn't have to pay for any of the insurance costs. He doesn't have to pay for any of the Medicaid costs. So he doesn't have to have that administrative cost that's adding to your bill. Plus, he gets to spend at least 30 minutes with you. Okay, right now, you might get 2 to 10 minutes with your doctor in a lot of cases. With this type of medicine, he gets to spend at the minimum 30 minutes with you and actually treat you. Okay. Now, $50 a month, $75 a month, $100 a month, that still is expensive at this point. But what if there's 10 doctors in that city doing that?
I guess the only thing that's going through my head right now is like, what if I get cancer? Because it's one thing to just get like your physical, but what if I get cancer or hit by a bus and I need some really major things that just a doctor down the street can't handle?
Right.
So what if I have to go into a big hospital system? Like, I don't know how we do a hybrid.
Right. That's a totally different thing. So right now,
is it though?
I think it is. I think you can have catastrophic insurance for your medical care. So everything that you pay a deductible for now, like hospital stays, major tests, that sort of thing, I think we can have insurance for, just like you have catastrophic insurance for your car. Mm-hmm. If you have a crash, your insurance company pays for it. But if you have maintenance, your insurance company doesn't pay for it right now. Mm-hmm. Okay?
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think that's one good step, is getting insurance out of our daily, day-to-day medical care.
Yeah, because it was never intended to be that way.
Right.
It's problematic because what you're finding now is that doctors are hiking up their prices so high because they're expecting not to get much back from the insurance companies. So it's like there's no good reason why a physical should cost $400, but they're just trying to game the reimbursements they get from the insurance industry. I mean, the entanglement is what's costing a lot of the skyrocketing prices, because they're not based on anything. They're not based on anything. I guess that sentence has to stop right there.
Right. And these doctors don't even know how much things cost.
Yeah.
Okay. So all those labs that you got sent out for, he doesn't have any control over any of that. That's between the insurance company and the lab. So that's another issue that goes along with all this. These membership, and I don't like the membership part of, but that's just what this Lincoln doctor called it. It's more than a membership. It's personalized medicine. That's one thing we can look at. Getting insurance companies and government, again, out of our day-to-day medicine. That's a start. Like you said, the problem with the two bills that we're looking at now, the Affordable Care Act and this new one, it's all about insurance companies. It isn't about your health at all.
Yeah. I cannot disagree with that at all.
Right. So where we're disagreeing is how we get insurance companies out of it and how we get it to where it's just you and your doctor taking care of your medicine.
I mean, I don't even think we're disagreeing. I just genuinely don't know how we do it.
Okay, that's fair. I'm a big fan of history, and to look at what the government has done across the world and what our own government is doing now is just, I don't want them involved in my medical care at all.
See, but that's the part that, like, based on my own experience, I lived in Germany for 6 months and I did get pretty sick. And based on my experience of dealing with the government provided healthcare, it was fantastic. Like I went across the street, there were doctors everywhere, and it was more kind of like it wasn't like a membership model because I could go to anyone I wanted to, but there were small clinics all over the place. You could tell what they were. There was a red cross on the front of the buildings, and you would go in and there would be one or two doctors there, kind of always on call. If you were really sick, they would get in the car and come to you, and it was paid for with taxes. And granted, like I didn't have a catastrophic injury or something that could be put off, like a knee injury or something like that had to be dealt with. I do know that there are people that are waiting for those types of services. But having lived in Germany with a family that had a bunch of kids, they had no complaints about their healthcare whatsoever. And they didn't mind paying the taxes for it because they knew that no matter what happened to them and their families, they could get care, whether it was getting a cold or getting hit by that bus. And so just from my own personal experience of having lived in one of those government provided healthcare countries, it was great. And then there's other things that we do in this country that no one seems to complain about, like the fire department. It's kind of along the same lines. It's something that you don't need until you need it. And we don't complain about that. So I'm not afraid of government provided healthcare the way I am with health insurance provided healthcare.
Mm-hmm. I can see because I haven't lived in Germany. I haven't experienced that. There's a lot of things that we can talk about as far as at your state level. I think that would be okay, right? So if California decided it wanted to do single payer, California has every right to do so. Mm-hmm. But as a nation, I don't think that our government has the authority to do that. Your policemen, your firefighters,
It does with the military.
It does with the military because it's in the Constitution that they are in charge of that. Okay. The Constitution does not give the federal government the authority to cover health care.
See, I'm not sure that's true, because if we talk about, the right to life, what is it? Life. There were three things. Sorry, it's really early for me here.
Oh, no, that's right.
Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. I mean, life. That's healthcare. That's doctors.
You're absolutely right. I agree with you. That is in the Declaration of Independence that Thomas Jefferson said that. And in the Constitution, the federal government's power is very limited. Okay, the Constitution says you can do this, and you can do this, and you can do this. Everything else is left up to the states.
Yeah.
Okay. So California has every right to do a single-payer healthcare system if that's what they want to do. California sends $400 billion a year to Washington, D.C. I don't know how much of that they get back.
Not as much as we give. I know that.
Of course.
We're a donor state.
Right. So I don't know how much you get back. But Tennessee, where I live, we give $62 billion a year to the federal government. We get back 13.
Oh, wow.
Right. So if Tennessee had its own money, then it could pay for health care if it wanted to. But the Constitution does not give the federal government that authority. Does that make sense?
I mean, it does, but at the same time, like, that money that you do get back, it does pay for Medicare. It goes back to all of us. In the military, we can't forget how much we're spending on the military. It's just as much as healthcare.
I completely agree. Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah.
We spend way too much money on the military. I don't disagree with you there. And I fully support our military. But we don't need $600 billion worth of military to protect our country.
No, we don't. And our missions are not about protecting our country. I think that's what's so frustrating. So it's like when we talk about our budgeting, if we were putting money into the system and actually getting the return on our investment, which I think is what we're both a little frustrated with, is that I don't feel as a Californian, and certainly not as a Tennessee resident with that type of numbers, I don't feel like I'm getting the full return on my investment, but it's because I'm watching where it's being diverted. So that's one of my concerns. And even with the health insurance system, the Affordable Care Act forces the insurance companies to spend 80% of what they bring in on our health care. If we repeal that, then they're not even going to spend that much. So for me, a lot of it is like when I pay my taxes, I want a return on my investment. I wouldn't even mind a little tax hike if all of my health insurance expenses were covered, regardless of what happened to me. Mm-hmm. So that's where I just I don't know. I don't think that the government doesn't have the authority to do this because it is an essential government function. For me, an essential government function is something that every single person truly needs. And so that's why I put firefighters in that category. That's why I do put the military in that category, something that everybody needs. And so with doctors, I put that on the list too, because it's easy to say well, I'm healthy, I don't need a doctor, but you're only healthy until you're not.
Right.
And your house is only not burning until it is. So I do want to put that on the list. And right now it's not on the list. So and my concern with it being state-based is in California, let's say we have a health insurance system, but then what happens if Louisiana elects a governor who just decides that the government doesn't exist down there anymore? They're still Americans. They're still citizens. At some point, I do feel like we're going to have to step in and deal with that situation, whether it's by giving money to that state or by everybody leaving and coming to my state anyway. I just feel like if we're going to be a civil society of 50 states as one, I just think that when it comes to doctors, it's one of those things that we can't leave up to the whims of a crazy governor,
That's why I don't want the national government involved in it either, because it's the whims of Congress or a president.
Congress is at least elected by us in every single state. I mean, that's how it's put together. It is the nation coming together saying, this is what we're going to do. Mm-hmm. And my concern is, we can say, well, you can just move, but we all know it's not that easy.
Oh, definitely not.
Yeah. And so I just don't know how we do it on a state-by-state basis, knowing that some states just aren't going to have what everybody else has. And when it's something as serious as life and death, I just think, I don't know, I'm just really uncomfortable with the idea.
I understand. I understand exactly where you're coming from. It's a very emotional issue. I completely believe that every person has a need for health care. Don't get me wrong, right? I'm not saying that nobody should be denied the right to have medical attention. That's definitely not what I'm saying. But as a government, we operate a certain way. That's what the states decided when they made the Constitution. And, it's a contract between the states saying, hey, this is how we're going to operate. So if we don't operate that way, that's concerning to me. Does that make sense?
It does, but I'm not familiar with any part in the Constitution that says that the federal government shall not provide health care. I don't see how that's unconstitutional.
Okay. I understand. I disagree because it lists what the government can do instead of what the government can't, and says the states have the right to do whatever's left, right?
Well, if the states agree to do this as a nation, why can't we do it as a nation?
Because I don't think the states would agree to do it that way.
I think they kind of already are. We do have this giant government, insurance hybrid system. I mean, it's already happening.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I don't see any evidence of it being unconstitutional.
Okay. Let's move on to how do you think that these bills are going to hurt the American people?
I think they're literally going to kill people.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is that serious, because if people can't afford to go to the doctor, they're going to let diseases progress, and they'll go to the doctor when it's already beyond the point of no return. And then even if you're there, if you're finding out that you can't afford the treatments that you need or the medications that you need, you don't get them, you don't take them, you don't survive. So that's what I'm so concerned about. And so many of the things that I saw inside of the repeal and replace bill, they almost incentivized the insurance companies to jack up premiums, because there were certain provisions in the Affordable Care Act that were designed to penalize the insurance companies for jacking them up, and now they're gone. And then the most important thing for me is the essential benefits package being gone in 2020. I mean, that's just terrible. And that's things like ambulances, an ambulance. There was a time here before the Affordable Care Act where you had to get permission to take an ambulance, or you had to pay for it out of pocket, and that's thousands of dollars. And so what you find is that it changes people's behavior. They'll be having a heart attack, and they'll say, God, I'm not sure it's a heart attack, so maybe I should drive, and then they're in a car stuck in traffic without the sirens that get you through it. I mean, there are going to be real life implications of making people choose between their wallet and their health. And, I think it's going to kill people. That's my biggest concern.
Mm-hmm. I'm not a fan of either one of these bills. I think our Congress has done a terrible job on both of them. One, on top of the medical risks, I don't think that either one of these bills will drive healthcare costs down. Right. So even if we do go to a nationalized system where everybody's on Medicare, medical costs are not going to go down. It's just whoever pays for it is going to change.
See, that I disagree with.
Okay.
Because if you have, they call it single payer, which I think is confusing to not you, obviously, but I think it is confusing to a lot of people. But if you have one customer, then the prices can be set. The doctors can say, this is how much we charge. There can be negotiations. Like right now for prescription drugs, even though the U.S. government buys the vast majority of them, Congress made it illegal for them to negotiate those prices down. So every other country in the world is able to negotiate with these companies and use that amazing market power that they have to bring the prices down. We're not allowed to do that. So if we were to change the law, we would be able to have that negotiating power. And then also, like I said before, a lot of the reasons why the prices inside of the hospitals and doctors' offices are as high as they are is because they're trying to game the system to get as much money back as they can with the insurance companies, knowing that the insurance companies are going to lowball them. So what you find is when you do pay for something out of pocket, you're able to negotiate one-on-one with the doctor or the hospital, and a lot of times those prices are way lower when it comes down to what it actually costs. So I do think by switching over to a single payer, government is the customer, you're not going to see them jacking up the prices like that, because they're just going to know what their reimbursements is, and that's that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I understand what you're saying. That tends to not work economically in a lot of other industries. Okay, so if you have one customer, say you own a bagel shop, and I'm not comparing bagels to medicine, okay? Medicine is much more important. Human life is much more important to bagels, so that's not what I'm saying.
But bagels are delicious.
Bagels are delicious. But if you have one customer that comes in every day and you know he's going to be there, why not increase your prices? He has
See,
unlimited
I'm the
funds.
opposite. I'm the person that gives that guy a discount every once in a while because I know he's going to be there and I want to keep him there. So it just depends on how you run it.
Right. But I don't think he's going to get a discount because he's always going to come no matter what.
Well, then why wouldn't he just be priced the same as ever? Like, I don't understand why you would raise the price of all the bagels because one dude really likes those bagels.
Because
I mean, even the premise doesn't make sense to me.
Because a lot of people think that way. That's just human nature to get as much as possible as soon as possible it's just an innate need to survive. Right?
Well, I mean, if the government's able to cap prices, because it's the government, it makes all the laws. If the government's able to say, like, this is what you get in return, like, I don't see how that would happen. I mean, a doctor can go ahead and raise his prices to the people, but that's kind of where the market comes in. Because you could look at one doctor and you know that they're getting paid the same amount from the government. And if one is charging more than the other, I mean, why would you go to the one that charges more? I don't see.
Right. So let's look at it from the doctor's side. Let's not look at it from the patient. It makes complete sense from the patient's side. I agree with you. But let's look at the doctor. Why would a doctor not charge more if he could?
Because I don't think he could.
Right. So
if the government's only going to pay you, like, let's say for a physical, a government's going to pay you $20. Mm-hmm. You get the pay, like, you can't charge the government more because the government's going to say, like, well, you're only getting a $20 check, so you can send as many invoices as you want, but too bad.
Okay, that makes sense. So why would he stay in that business if he doesn't get the incentive that he needs to stay there?
Well, I mean, I have doctors in my family and they don't go into it to become filthy rich.
You're right.
And so I think what would happen is that people would become doctors because they want to save lives. And then we would have the power as the government to pay them very well or pay for their school, So if someone goes into being a doctor and is a doctor for 5 years and all of a sudden all of their payments are gone, I mean, that's an incentive. But we have the power to pay really good doctors $500,000 a year, and I'd be perfectly happy with doing it. We pay that to CEOs, we pay way more than that to CEOs. So it's like for brilliant brain surgeons or people that have a lot of education and that are rare, we can pay them a lot of money. We have that freedom.
Right. So who can pay them, though?
The government.
Right.
The people that would be paying.
And where does the government get their money?
From us taxpayers.
From us taxpayers. Right.
Yes.
So why are we, me and you, entitled to someone else's money?
How is that an entitlement to someone else's money?
So
the way I see it, I pay taxes, so that's just a return on my investment.
But do you pay enough taxes to pay every doctor in the country $500,000?
Well, no, but that's why we pool our money like that. So that we can't, and I'm not saying that every doctor would get that much money, but what I am saying is, like, you asked, why would a doctor become a doctor?
Right.
They would become a doctor to save lives and to make money, because that's why people take any job. And so we would have the power that if someone becomes a doctor and is just like a very basic general practitioner, we have hundreds of thousands of them all over the country. There's a certain price for that. But if that person then decides to go into a specialty, becomes a pediatric surgeon or a brain surgeon or something more specific that takes more schooling, there's more money for that. And I would be willing to pay into that system, because if I get that brain tumor, then I would have that service accessible to me. And so would my mom and my sister and my cousins and everybody else in my family. And that level of safety and security and knowing that I can afford the care that I need, it's worth every penny that it comes out of my pocket. Mm-hmm. And I don't feel like I'd be paying for other people. I feel like that's me chipping into a system that's designed to help every single one of us, including me. And if the system isn't there, then, like, this is a big system that we need. And so we can't do healthcare a la carte, because I can't afford to pay for a brain surgeon. Mm-hmm. I can't afford to pay for that guy's education and his salary and all the equipment that he needs. I mean, this is one of those things we have to do together, or else it doesn't exist. That's part of the problem with this one. It's not a bagel shop, because in a bagel shop, you can buy the equipment. You can buy, like, the people that live within walking distance of that place, they can't afford to prop up that business. Healthcare is so different, mm-hmm. My dad had a nasty, nasty heart attack in 2012. And in the process of bringing him back, the defibrillator, the electric shock that went into him blew out both of his shoulders. It was crazy. They just turned into dust. And this doesn't happen very often. It actually mostly happens to golfers who play golf in lightning storms. And so there were 2 surgeons in the entire country that could take care of my dad. And the surgeon that ended up taking care of him, he was in Montana waiting for golfers to get struck by lightning. And so he got flown to UCLA Medical Center. It took about 2 days and they repaired both of his shoulders. But that's one of those things, like there were 2 in the country. And so my family had no way to provide that, to just have him on standby. You know, it had to be a systemic thing that this surgeon even existed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I completely understand that part of it. Again, catastrophic events have to have somebody else involved. There's no doubt about that. Let's talk about the cost of all this just a little bit. We definitely have to increase our taxes to do a single payer system. Do you think that's fair to say?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
To be completely honest.
I don't.
Because here's the thing, like, so there's a phrase like that made the Tea Party very famous. Taxed enough already is where tea came from.
Okay.
I 100% believe that we are. One of the problems that we have is so much of the money that we're giving to the government is being diverted into private pockets. And then, of course, we do have military bloat, and we have a lot of the money that we put into our healthcare system, even the one that we have, Medicare and the VA and Medicaid, a lot of that is getting siphoned off by contractors. And so I do feel like if government were run by true statesmen and not greedy people working on behalf of companies, I do think we're taxed enough already, and that kind of reorganizing and really cracking down on fraud, I actually think we would have a chance of being able to do this without having a significant amount of money come out of our pockets. Also, if you keep in mind, because I consider the money that I pay towards my health insurance company, if you think of that as money that you'd still have coming out of your pocket, just goes in a different way. I guess the question for me is, does more money have to come out of our pockets to make this happen? And I think the answer is no. Do we have to raise taxes? Probably, but having that expense be switched out, I think that's what would, like, it's a different question for me. Like, taxes would have to be raised, but I wouldn't have to pay hundreds of dollars every month to this private insurance company where I know 20% of it is going into people's pockets. You know?
Yeah,
so
sure.
Maybe, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right. I think you've hit on a great point right there. I think all of this comes down to we need to fix our corrupt system. Yeah. And then we can make better informed decisions. But just throwing things out there like these 2 healthcare bills that we're living under right now is, in my opinion, certainly not the answer. Like I said, my answer to all this is to get rid of insurance and government at the small everyday health level, have catastrophic insurance for those that need it for anything other than that. Look at it state by state. And your answer to all this is the government as a national healthcare system. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Okay. But I don't think we're going to get either one of those. So what do we do about fixing what we have now? From your experience looking at Congress, how can people get involved now? And let's get to fixing our system and then dealing with these specific topics.
Well, I actually disagree that we're never going to get either one of them. I actually think Medicare for All is almost inevitable at this point, because everyone who's saying that the Affordable Care Act system is breaking is right. They're absolutely right. We have a lot of insurance companies dropping out of the exchanges, because one of the things is with the Affordable Care Act is that these insurance companies have to provide certain benefits, and there's rules in the exchanges. And so these insurance companies are leaving the exchanges at the same time, and it's breaking the system because they want to create plans like they had before the Affordable Care Act that collect premiums and don't provide as much health care in return. I mean, that's how profits are made in the insurance company. And so, so the system is breaking. If this becomes law, this repeal and replace thing, it's going to break so much faster. And so we're going to have another crisis like we did before the Affordable Care Act became law. And we have a solution that's just sitting there waiting for us. It's already being discussed on a national level. So I actually think it's inevitable. And if people wanted to make that happen faster, you need to vote for people that support it. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, because right now, what I'm seeing in Congress is a lot of people that do what their donors tell them to do, with their donors being very large companies and the CEOs of companies. And so really it's people like you and I that need to get involved, maybe even run ourselves. But we can't just think that Congress that Congress is not something we have to pay attention to. I mean, that's why I do the podcast. We all pay attention to the presidential level. Everyone's talking about Trump and Hillary in 2016. And we had, I actually wrote it down. I have a giant map on my desk that has all of the congressmen written on it. And I thought I would have to buy a new map, but there were so few congressmen that were changed that I was able to just cross them off, the few that were. It was something like 6%. Were changed. And the vast majority of those were because someone retired or left voluntarily. I think there were like 3 people that were legitimately fired. That is horrendous based on the job performance that I saw in the 114th Congress.
I know.
Yeah. So we have to fire these people that are creating these terrible systems. I mean, this bill was written so badly that there's a section in here, like the way that you fix a current law is you cross out paragraphs and then you replace them, right?
Right.
They replaced the paragraph with the current law.
That's so terrible.
How quickly this was done.
Yeah, it's a disaster. I am so frustrated and upset with our government at every level. And it doesn't matter what you believe politically. I think we all feel the exact same way. We're frustrated and think that this total system is broken and corrupt.
Well, and that's the part where I don't feel that way because as I watch the system, it's not the system that disturbs me. In fact, the system quite a few times has stopped things that need to be stopped. Like here's a good example. There's so many people, and keep in mind, I'm in like San Francisco, so it doesn't get more liberal than this area.
Right.
And so I'm hearing way too often that Trump's an authoritarian, he's a dictator, he's this, he's a Nazi, just this crazy over-exaggeration of the situation, which was proved wrong to me because the system worked when he put forth the travel ban, where he banned people from 7 countries, and the courts put a stop to it. And so that's an example of the system that we have working correctly, where it's like, okay, well, this guy thinks he can do this, but he actually can't, and it was stopped. And so up until, I actually think it's this Thursday that the next travel ban goes into effect. But for the last month and a half, that hasn't been in effect because the court system stepped in. So I actually do find our system to be brilliant. It's the people we've put in charge of it that are the problem. So that's where I see an enormous amount of hope, because I'm in California. Theoretically, you and I should be screaming at each other right now. We're not.
Right.
I have conversations all the time with people all over the country where we all feel a sense of frustration, but we're also willing to have conversations where we get down to the details. So I feel like there's a new generation of people that are willing to work together now and don't really buy into the red versus blue thing in the way that the baby boomers did. And so I actually have an enormous amount of hope. And I also have an enormous amount of hope in the fact that 50% of us didn't vote in 2016. That's a terrible thing. But it means a lot of people are sitting on the sidelines just as frustrated as you and I, and they're waiting for something different from what we've been offered. So I think the possibility of changing these people, that can change the way our government functions quite quickly, because we get to vote out the House of Representatives every 2 years, and they control all of the money. So I'm actually more in love with the system itself every single year that I do this podcast. But I hate some of the people that are in Congress more and more every year. So I blame the individuals, not the system.
Right. I think that's fair. I agree with you.
I mean, even in this conversation, we're just like, does the Constitution allow it? And both of us are like, well, that matters. You know, I love the Constitution. It sounds like you do too. I like what the founders put in place. We need some tweaks, obviously. But on a whole, I really like the checks and balances. I think the executive branch is obviously too bloated, and we can do something about that. I just feel like all the problems we have are fixable if we have serious people who want to fix it. Right now, we have a lot of people that want to win the next election. Yeah. That's all that matters to them. In fact, there's phone banks across the street from the Capitol. So instead of being in the halls and participating in the debates about these bills, the House of Representatives is generally empty. There's not a lot of people there. There's designated people that go to do the debates on C-SPAN, but every once in a while, the C-SPAN camera will go to the seats. There's no one in there. Yeah. Instead, they're across the street in the phone banks dialing for dollars. They're fundraising. It's a completely selfish endeavor because they just want to keep their own power. That's a dynamic we need to change. For every single bill, there should be asses in those seats. And so, And so we kind of know what we need to do. We need to hire people that are not in it for themselves and for the money. And until we do that, we're going to have these problems. But this is a fixable thing. So I'm actually really hopeful.
Well, it's good. You know, I've met more and more people that are feeling that way. And I hope that trend does keep growing. I want us all to be involved. I want us all to have good conversations and get us to a place where we're functioning correctly.
Me too. And you know what? Tennessee, where your state is one of my favorites because getting on the ballot as an independent in the House of Representatives, your state's one of the easiest. Mm-hmm. I did a whole episode on it. I wish I could remember the exact states, but it was something ridiculous. It was like $25 and maybe 500 signatures, which I could do over the course of a weekend.
Right. We have a bill coming up very soon. I think it's a committee right now that deals with third parties. Right now, the Libertarian Party has to get 40,000 signatures, I think, to get on. But there's a bill in committee right now that will lower that to 5,000 signatures.
Yeah, democracy is alive and well in Tennessee. I've never been there, but I'm fascinated by your state. I'm going to come soon. That is very, very cool. But I also don't even think we need the parties at this point because back in the day where we were riding around in horse and buggies and we had, carrier pigeons and stuff to carry our messages, that was a time where maybe you needed to have a party so it was easier to understand what someone stood for. Now we have the internet. We have communication that is so easy and you can do it from your own desk. I don't even think we need parties anymore because they do encourage groupthink no matter which party it is. Mm-hmm. So I would love to see just more independent candidates. Just get rid of the whole parties. I mean, not get rid of, obviously, like people are still going to join parties, but I would love to see more people say, this is what I believe, this is what I stand for, this is what I will do for you, because that will give them the wiggle room to not have to answer to some other private club, because really all of these parties are private clubs. When people say that the system is broken because the DNC rigged their primary, that's not the system, that's the DNC. Right. They're not constitutional at all. Neither is the Libertarian Party or the Republicans or the Greens.
Right.
So, and I did an episode last year to see if an independent could get on every ballot in every state, and they can. So that path is actually what is the most protected. And that gives me more hope than anything, because as long as this group think thing is happening, we're going to keep having the same troubles that we have. I mean, you can get rid of the Republican Party and replace it with the Libertarians, and you're still going to have the fundraising issues. Yeah. You're still going to have people caring more about what the party bosses say than what their constituents say. So, I mean, I think that's great that they're helping third parties, but I would rather people run as independents. I mean, that's
Sure, I can understand that. So, what do you think is the most effective way to change the mind of the congressmen or senators that are there now, even the ones
Fire.
Okay. I agree with you. It makes me cringe all the time when these people get reelected.
Yeah, they're too far gone. I think that communicating with congressmen, it can work in stopping certain bills, but at this point, there's like this, it's like the entire Congress is dealing on this groupthink where they think this system of bribery is okay. And they're all participating in it. And even now the solutions that are being proposed are a little disturbing to me too. Like for the Democratic Party, for instance, and it's not a bad idea, but there's something called Justice Democrats, which the idea is instead of taking large corporate donor fund, this sentence is not coming out properly, but instead of taking big amounts of money from corporations like Hillary did, they would primary all of the people that behave that way. And the fundraising for those candidates would just be small donors, but it's still collecting money as running instead of, talking about ideas. And so I would just love to see someone get in there and prove that this shouldn't be about money. And it doesn't matter which part, it's both parties, everyone in Congress, they all participate in the money game. And that's what really needs to stop. And so as far as the people that I see on this list on my desk here, there's a few worth saving, but not enough to not make fire them all happen. It's like I'm willing to take those casualties because they're so outnumbered to get a new crop of people in here that are really trying to think of solutions, because our problems have gotten too bad while they're all kissing donor ass,
Absolutely. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for being with us today. I enjoyed hearing your side. I hope you enjoyed our conversation as much as I did.
Very much so. And if you ever want to talk again, please reach out to me again because I really like you. This is a calm conversation with someone in the middle of the country. I live for this. So.
Awesome. I think you and I should sit down and let's talk about the Constitution, not on air, but just us talking about it. So
sure. That'd be fun.
That sounds fun to me. We're weird. You know that?
I think we're weird, but I think that there's more people like us than you know.
I think so too. All
yeah.
Right. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I certainly hope you enjoyed this episode of Kitchen Table Politics. Please give us a follow on Twitter at KTPOLS. That's KT Polls. And check out our website, ktpolitics.com. We'll see you next time.